Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another Dieline Decoded. What I would say is actually it's a first for us. It's a very special fireside chat. It's the first time we've ever done a live one before. And today I'm joined by with Michael Hester here. He's the founder and creative director from the award-winning San Francisco design and branding studio Pavement. They've
Thank you.
created packaging. Well, it's great to have you. You guys have created packaging and brand identities for folks like Whole Foods, E&J Gallo, Pete's Coffee, Dollar Shave Club, Williams Sonoma. Essentially, it's like you have done it all. So before we get started here today, I would say I just want to mention that we will have a live Q&A afterwards. I promise this time we will not have any technical difficulties. So it would be great if you guys could drop your questions in the chat box down there. We'll collect them. That's probably going to get started about like 1:30 or so. But yeah, we'll just get started here. So Michael, again, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
Why
Thanks
don't
for having me.
yeah, it's awesome that you're here. First, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your studio? How did you
Yeah.
come to design the packaging world?
Yeah. No, it was a kind of a long and winding road. I've been doing this since 1999. I was an art major at the University of Arizona, go Wildcats. And then from there, moved up here to San Francisco. And actually, my first job out of college was working for the Wall Street Journal. Was
Okay.
working in their marketing department, did a lot of things like designing presentations and designing event invitations and a lot of like random different things. And then moved back to New York with the Wall Street Journal, took a promotion out there, was there for a little bit. And then really where it all got started in packaging was when I moved back to California and I moved to Los Angeles, which is where I'm from. Um, when I was there, I was working with a lot of agencies, kind of on the agency side. In particular, I was working for a firm called Commune in West Hollywood, and we were doing all the packaging for Stila Cosmetics, and that was really my introduction into packaging. We were their agency of record, and we were doing everything for them. And then from that, I think I just naturally really began to love packaging, just the tactile aspect of it. That's a something that I would like to get into a lot today, and I think has a lot to do with Glorious and like what it is. And I think one of the unique things about packaging as well is that it's dimensional. With a lot of branding, it's flat, it's on a screen. We have the opportunity to actually have something that can be interacted with. So, it's always been great. And then from there, was working in Los Angeles for like 5 or 6 years, and then moved up here to San Francisco. And really, that's where it started with like retail. Moved in house. I worked for the Gap for a little bit and at their corporate office. And then from there to Williams Sonoma. And while I was at Williams Sonoma, I was the head packaging manager, the creative director for packaging, all their like white label in-house brands and such, a lot of food packaging. And that's really where, kind of like the skill set started to kind of, narrow down and funnel down to like where I am right now. I think Williams Sonoma was a pretty awesome opportunity that there was a lot of work. There was a lot of high exposure. And I think one of the things that like the leadership team there at the time really like put a premium on was like craft and really great design. And you could really do whatever you wanted. Williams Sonoma was really great in that there wasn't necessarily like a defined like house style. Actually, I shouldn't say it that way, like a house look, but there were kind of like guardrails to like what you could do. It was supposed to feel like a curated collection of products. So each product had its own like individual kind of like look and feel. So just a big opportunity to do a lot of like great work. And then we did that for a while, and then kind of had that itch to break out on my own and start do my own thing and take like that expertise that had kind of like formed over time and launched Pavement in 2014, with the intent of like really focusing on branding and packaging. and you know, trying to bring at that time, you know, definitely specialty foods, you know, kind of like carrying over that like experience from Williams Sonoma, and trying to leverage that, but then kind of like expand out into wine and spirits and such. So, you know, in those early days, did like a lot of like kind of our own projects, if you want to call it that. You know, one of like our first projects was creating kind of like a fictitious brand called Pavimento, a tequila, and you know, just allowing that to you know, to kind of create some traction. You know, you don't have a portfolio at that point, so you got to make your own portfolio. And you know, a lot of that early work got some attention, and it's just kind of grown since then. And you know, we've thrived ever since. And then you know, kind of curiously, like along the way, actually very early on, we were approached by a company called Bloom Farms, which was a cannabis brand. You know, kind of like one of the initial kind of like forefathers of cannabis in California. And I remember thinking, like, is this a good opportunity? I mean, I remember even talking to Jessica about this, like after the work was completed. You know, do you want to like publish and like publicize the fact that you're doing cannabis? And you know, I think for us, we were like, you know what, this is just a great opportunity. It's an emerging market, and we really embraced it. And that project, you know, I you know, kind of give the credit for really launching Pavement into kind of like the next level that we are in now. Without Bloom Farms and that client, we wouldn't be where we are today. It really gave us a great opportunity. The work was well received, you know, thank God. And then, you know, kind of like our that next specialty into cannabis kind of like naturally developed. So now at this point, you know, like I said, we're doing like wine and spirits, a lot of that work. Specialty foods still work for Williams Sonoma. Still doing a lot of cannabis work. It's kind of dwindled off a little bit just because of the market. Cannabis is kind of, you know, kind of going through that attrition, if you want to call it that. But now we're starting to like branch out into places like wellness and hospitality. We did like a restaurant brand last year. So yeah, things are good.
It's interesting because, and I don't want to belabor the point because you're just talking about Bloom, so I want to move on and talk about Glorious. But I think people forget that 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of studios and agencies did not want to touch cannabis projects at all. Like it's, you know, and I think it really was wise for studios really to kind of like jump at the chance to sort of do that. And, you know, obviously you guys have been, you know, killing it ever since.
Thank you.
So let's so the reason that we're here today, we're going to discuss Glorious Cannabis. Cannabis is glorious, obviously, but that's also the name of the brand. What was sort of the ask from Glorious? Like, what were they looking for design wise, and how did you guys deliver that?
Yeah, no, great question. You know, I think what was great about them is that they came to us with kind of like an aspirational kind of like, this is who we want to be. And we really want you to help us figure that out from a strategic standpoint. There was a really robust, you know, kind of like brand strategy phase before any like creative development started. But they did come to us with some very specific ideas. They had, you know, essentially set up a world-class like grow facility in Michigan. Michigan was, you know, at that time kind of like a emerging market. They had just become legalized, I think, like if I remember, like a year or two before they approached us, and they wanted to do things right. They hired like really good growers, really good people. They had like a great management team, and so they really wanted to kind of like tout that craft. They really saw their product as superior, and so that idea of premium. And they also wanted to kind of like tout the idea of transparency. I think that that's something that's really important in cannabis overall. Is, you know, it's still, you know, it's a product that lives in the black market, and so like I think as transparent as you can be, you're going to earn the trust of your customer. And so I think that they were spot on, and like we have to at like kind of like a fundamental level, like really communicate that. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting, and obviously like, you know, we latched onto, is they really wanted to kind of like capture like where they were from. And the brand, the headquarters are we were just outside of Detroit, just outside in the suburbs, and they really wanted to kind of like capture that ethos. I'm a Californian. We're out here in Oakland, but I think everybody kind of has a little bit of a preconceived idea of like what Detroit is. There's a kind of like a romance to it where, it's hard work, it's grit. The automotive industry is obviously, kind of headquartered there. I think there's like that work ethic that people think of, that blue collar work ethic when you think of Detroit. Obviously Detroit has gone through some struggles, like really like maybe about 10 years ago, and there's been this renaissance where the town has kind of like built back up from the ashes, so to speak. So we wanted to capture that too. And I think one of the things that they identified too really early on is there's some really like iconic like Detroit brands that we can kind of like leverage from and like look at. I think most notably Shinola. If you think about that brand, it's all about craft. It's all about like USA workmanship, but there's a panache to it. It's sophisticated. So we really use that kind of like as like an example. Like, okay, this is like a great brand that has really captured the spirit of Detroit, but without being like overly kind of like stereotypical about like what that is. So those were the like the initial asks, and then from there, it was like our job to like kind of strategically kind of like, okay, let's identify like a target. Who is this like this perfect customer for them? And one of the things that we really realized is that the cannabis industry in general kind of like lives in two places. It's obviously got its legal channels in the states where it's legal, but the black market is still very much there, and it still very much competes with the legal channels in the states where it is offered. So thinking about like, okay, so who is going to still keep buying in that kind of like black market illegal channel, and who's going to like feel comfortable with like a brand in a store? And what we really identified was this idea of like a millennial buyer, someone with like a little bit higher disposable income, maybe a little bit more savvy, college educated, etc. And we really thought that that would be like a great customer to potentially go after, not like overly revelatory in that sense, but just kind of like confirmed that. And then from there, like what we did is try to like look at like the landscape in the state and like what are other brands doing, and where is there essentially like a white space for Glorious Cannabis. And we identified there's like that traditional rec look, and I think this is true to a lot of like cannabis markets, where you have that kind of stereotypical like cartoony look, and then there's like the more sophisticated brands, like I think of nothing knocking on them, but like a brand like Cookies or like Jeter. Those really live on that like kind of like hyper rec side. And then, but I think what we've done with a lot of our brands is tried to go towards more of that sophisticated side, and just naturally kind of like identified that white space that a lot of the brands in Michigan at the time were kind of like living more on that like truly rec side. So we were like, okay, let's definitely do something that's premium. It kind of validated where we were already going, to kind of like live within that like particular white space. And then from there, like we just thought about, okay, like what are these different archetypes of like people that are like consuming cannabis? And we identified, I think like 8 or 9 different categories. And there's like, kind of like the heavy consumer. Those heavy consumers are living in that rec side. They're concerned about like the percentages of the THC, except stuff like that. And then there's people like the medical purists, people that are actually have a legitimate need for it, whether it be like a glaucoma or pain management or something like that. That's definitely something that you could potentially latch onto, but it really represents a pretty small like aspect of the market. But what we identified were what we called these like cannabis 2.0 users, like, or modern lifestylers. And it is this millennial, college educated, highly discerning, stylish customer. And that was essentially kind of like our ideal customer. So we identified them. And then from there, like we went in and kind of developed like a couple different like kind of like visual directions for where the brand could go. One was, you know, really kind of like tied to craft and mirrored, to be completely transparent, Shinola, and kind of like what they were doing. But it kind of felt like it's been done. We've done that. It's been there. And then like the one where we ended up kind of like targeting in was this idea of the what do we call it? The Renaissance spirit. And this was really kind of like capturing that Detroit ethos. We created a mood board, and on it was like an image, and it was like an image that I fell in love with, and I was like, okay, this is the brand. And it was this image of Jack White, of the White Stripes, and he's in like all red. He's got his black hair. He's got his white like lacquer guitar, and there's like a grit, obviously, to him. The music, he is undeniably Detroit, but there's like a panache to him too, and it's kind of like that kind of like Detroit 2.0. So we used him as kind of like a quite frankly kind of like an avatar, if you will, for the brand. And really,
I'm so disappointed in myself because I feel like I should have known that. There was like a White Stripes to it.
yeah. I actually have a mood board. Is there a way that I could share like a visual here? I'd love to just kind of show like the final mood board. I can also
only by holding it up right now because
yeah, okay, good. I've got it
there you
out
go.
here. Hopefully people can see this, but
yeah,
you can see that there's like a lot of like we took some images of Detroit where there's like this industrial kind of like Renaissance space, like an old firehouse that had turned into like a cocktail bar. There's that image of Jack White, you know, some like liquor brands, intelligentsia, again that red, and
yeah.
everybody, the client team, us on this side, really fell in love with this like mood board, and that's really where the brand launched from. um and when we saw that, it was like black and red, and it's like, okay, let's think about kind of like that iconic brand color, and just knew whatever we did, it had to be some kind of combination of black and red, and that's
Yeah.
really where we started.
That's great. That's great. Well, now that we've talked about the red and the black, we definitely need to
Yeah,
start talking about paper. So, which
definitely.
papers did you use for the project, and why did you go with those?
Yeah, we used Neenah Classic Crest paper.
Okay.
And I have to, at this point, give a lot of credit to Studio on Fire.
Mm,
They are a fantastic partner of ours. They were really instrumental, kind of like not only in the creation of this package, but the selections of the papers as well. We knew, obviously, we wanted to have this like red black combination. You know, started talking to that team over there, and you know, like, what about like Classic Crest Imperial Red? It is kind of like the paper, and I was like, yes. Took a look at the swatch. It's bright, vivid red, and just instantly was like, well, what if you take that bright, vivid red with like kind of the uncoated, and then you put black foil on top of it? That's going to
mhm.
look pretty amazing. So that's really where we started with the aesthetic.
And how did you determine which printing techniques to use? And also, and further, how do you determine which paper to use for each printing technique?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we're doing letterpress or foil stamping, which obviously is a lot of what cannabis, glorious cannabis is,
Mm,
it always kind of starts with an uncoated sheet. You know, we want that premium feel that like a uncoated sheet kind of like offers. Um, and the quite honestly, like we end up using Classic Crest quite a bit because it is
mm,
such a great paper that really like takes that impression really well. You know, there's some papers that are too spongy, and like a Cranes, it's a beautiful paper, like a Letraset, but it's just too spongy. Where this really holds it, and you kind of get some crisp lines. So oftentimes, quite honestly, we end up using a lot of like Neenah papers.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do letterpress, that's really where it starts.
Yeah. And full disclosure for the audience, you also won the Neenah Paper Award at the Dieline Awards for Glorious Cannabis. Should probably point that one out. but they are
Yeah,
they're such
thank
beautiful
you.
papers. Um, so how do you convince a client to spend a little bit more on their packaging when you're using papers like this or printing techniques like this, because it's not always the cheapest option in the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, and it's oftentimes like something that gets a lot of pushback, quite honestly,
Mhm.
especially like in cannabis, where there's the stereotypical or the common, the typical, I should say, delivery method for like flour is a mylar bag, like a plastic bag, with just the printing on the outside, or like a jar. And I think with something like this, um, you know, doing letterpress and putting the cannabis in a sack and then putting it in the box, much like if you want to think of it like a cereal box, it
Mhm.
really instantly differentiates the product. There's everything else that's going to be in the dispensary is going to be packaged differently. So it's instantly going to feel premium. It's instantly going to feel, kind of like in a different place. It's going to create that like extra point of differentiation, which is naturally going to hopefully lead to additional sales. So that for me, like, you got to be able to address that bottom line. Okay, so if you're going to spend a little bit of extra money, is it going to translate into more dollars of sales? And I think it's hard to quantify that. Create it's just in general kind of like to quantify that return on investment. But I think inherently, like when you're doing something like this and you put the dollars into it, it communicates craft. It communicates that you've put effort not only into your product, but your packaging, like every touch point of the brand is really considered. So I think naturally that that like psychology on shelf, people are going to think of the product as better. So yeah, that's our sell. That's how we try and sell it to our clients.
So speaking of touch points, it's a great segue. Let's talk about embossing and haptics. Haptics being like one of my recent favorite words. Don't really know why, but yeah, I'll define it just in case. It's the use of
Yeah.
technology that stimulates the sense of touch and motion. Why do you build so much of that into some of your designs? Like, for instance, the design for the Nootropic Wellness brand number 8, I would say really sort of revels in those techniques.
Yeah, yeah. No, great question, because I think it's something that we really thrive on. Kind of like as a studio. I talked about it. I touched on it like briefly, like earlier in this conversation. But with packaging, it's dimensional design. It's something that's like you can hold and feel. It's not just flat. It's not just a picture. So anything you can do to kind of like increase that tactile experience of the package, in my opinion, is all that much better. So that always involves, like, if you look at like a lot of like our portfolio, there's always, it seems like some kind of like foil, some kind of embossing, some kind of special paper. And it's just
Mhm.
a different kind of like combination of that toolkit. But we always, I think, try and like employ like a little bit of that, because it would just be such like a missed opportunity with packaging, in my opinion, if you didn't really think about like how can you hold this and like actually see it, and you get those like the number 8 project I think is being viewed right now. um
Mhm.
you get those shadows and those highlights, and it really kind of like, it's great. I mean, I think flat packaging to me is just so boring. And so yeah, we always try and incorporate that.
Right on. So your design and the studio seems to have a very specific POV, and you've sort of managed to maintain and build up a particular style and aesthetic, I think. How have you guys been able to maintain that?
That's a good question. I think we, as a studio, honestly, kind of try to avoid like a house style as much as possible. We really try and think of like our designs as really kind of like unique to like what the customer is looking for and like
Sure.
what our clients are kind of like who they're trying to target. Um, and so we try and think of things like a little bit more strategically, not to single any other studios out, but I think there's studios out there that you know what you're getting before you even approach them.
Mhm.
Especially kind of like in the alcohol space, like some of the leaders in that space, like what a certain bottle is going to look like from a studio, what they're going to produce.
We'll
Um,
single them out after this. We'll single them all out after this.
yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but the yeah, I think we try and like really try and be as unique as possible with what we do. But that said, I fully recognize that there's some kind of like undertones and some like currents to like what we do. I think a lot of what we do is very sophisticated,
Mhm.
and I also think a lot of like there's a lot of craft that goes into like what we do. There's like filigree and foiling details. Like a premium is put on typography, um, illustration. In my opinion, it's very kind of like labored, crafty design. I This is just my personal opinion. I despise like kind of like overly minimal design. I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
that when you can put that craft into it and put that kind of like level of detail into it, you can really shine as a product and shine as a designer, quite frankly. And it's so that to me, that's like our aesthetic is that craft, and then what that is out there, depends like on the client. And to circle back to your question, I think that why we've been able to maintain that is because we put broad, essentially kind of like how we attain our clients is we put our work out there in the world, whether it be like on the Dieline or other websites or other blogs, and people are coming to us because they've seen the work, and they've
Yeah.
enjoyed kind of like the style of work that we've created. So it's great. I mean, we create like these fantastic projects, these dream projects that like go really well, and they just naturally bring more of that. And Glorious is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself a type-driven designer? And the reason that I wanted to ask that is just because the typography for almost all of your projects is so beautiful. Like it seems like the perfect like pick every single time. So
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Definitely consider ourselves type driven, especially myself. I think a lot of designs start with the type.
mhm,
Kind of like in our process, obviously when you're building a panel, building a front panel for a package or building, starting to build a brand, to me, it really starts with unique typography, and the more proprietary it can be, the better. And so we're always like, either trying to create like unique lockups or, a lot of like hand lettering, custom lettering. You'll see a lot of that in our work. So yeah, absolutely, it's definitely where we start.
yeah. I do want to ask you because this slide has come up a couple times now during the presentation, but I wanted to ask you about both the half meat, half veggie burger that you guys developed the packaging and branding for, because it does actually feel like a departure a little bit from some of your work, and not just
Sure.
because it's not booze and weed. Can you tell me a little bit about that project? Because that was another one that we really sort of liked.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, no, that's a great example of kind of like a deviation from like what our typical like look might be for sure. First off, the both is a they were maybe one of my favorite clients of all time. The two founders are two of the nicest possible people you will ever meet, like incredibly respectful, and trusting. I think when you have like customers that trust you, clients that trust you, it just creates great work. And they were definitely like the epitome of that. So with that product, um, we really wanted to signal innovation. It's a you obviously, like, it's become very trendy, recently, to reduce meat
Mhm.
consumption for health reasons, for environmental reasons. And so when they were creating this product, they're like, okay, yeah, but I'm not a vegan and I'm not ready to be a
Yeah.
vegan. So like, how can I still do good, but still get, kind of like that, what I want? And both kind of like meets that place. To me, both it was just such a great name, and
Mhm.
it screams. You like both, and so we knew instantly that we wanted to put that big and bold on the package. Something that really just kind of screams, stands out on shelf from 20 feet away. And then from there, kind of like layer back in like a little bit of like what we do with the custom typography. Kind of bring that humanity back to it, where it
Mhm.
doesn't feel too cold or too sterile. Like just the typography with a product shot might feel a little bit, kind of like, okay. But bringing that layer back in, I think kind of like really grounded it. And I think the result is something that is, it is different. We have that great photography. Christina Schmidhofer created the photography for that. Um, and that hero burger image, I think is really critical to that brand as well. And there aren't a lot of opportunities for like what we do with like cannabis and wine and spirits and specialty foods to
Yeah.
often have that big photo. So I think
Mhm.
inherently, like, having that big photo feels really different for us. um, and that's where we started with that project, was that big both and that photo, and then trying to build around it, and kind of like build that brand around it. And then from there, like the split, kind of like white cream with the blue,
Mhm.
kind of just to talk about the two sides. It was a really fun brand, that really keen, easy. There's like some brands that takes a little bit to get to that final spot, but this one just kind of like flowed really well. And like you said, it's definitely different from what we've done.
Yeah, and also just as a product, I'm interested to see what happens with it in the next year or so.
Yeah.
It is kind of fascinating that they have done like the 50% meat, 50% veggie. I have no idea like if people want that or not, but they probably do.
It, it,
It is hard to
I've had this,
ease into
the
that.
samples that they've sent. And I'm
Mhm.
not just saying this. I mean, it is really good. It does not taste like you're sacrificing anything. So yeah, it's a great product.
Right. Yeah. What is a project that you've always sort of wanted to work on? Like, what's your dream packaging project?
Huh. Well, yeah, that's a tough question. 'Cause I think, honestly, if I'm being really truthful, like, we've been really fortunate, and like a lot of those like dream projects have come.
Mhm.
Um, I think Glorious Cannabis, some of the spirits packaging, that we've done a lot of spirits packaging this past year. And
Mhm.
that's like a place that I really kind of like wanted to expand into. I think for myself, like, I hold a lot of reverence to like the work that like a stranger and stranger does. And have
Sure.
always
Yeah.
really aspired to kind of like their level of craft, quite frankly.
Mhm.
um and so like being able to do projects that can kind of like live in that world, to me, we've done a lot of that this past year. And it's where I'm hoping to kind of continue. Dream projects, I think one of the opportunities that we got last year was to work on, like a restaurant brand for the first time. A
Mhm.
client was able to put like trust in us, having not had a lot of experience in that category. And it was a lot of fun. So I think kind of, that to me would be like another dream project, is, maybe being able to like, kind of like brand another high profile restaurant. But
Yeah.
yeah, we've done we've been really fortunate, and I'm, it's not lost on me. Like, we do all these great brands, like, coffee and Williams Sonoma and cannabis. So we're lucky in that respect.
if there, I'm gonna throw another one at you. If there was one of the big spirit brands that you could redesign, who would you want to redesign?
Huh. That is a good question. Um, and one I haven't put like a whole lot of thought into.
I know. I'm
Um,
sorry, that did not come in the questions I gave you, but it's one to ask anyway.
no,
It's fun.
no, but I love it. I love this. I think, um, you know, uh, I mean, like a lot of those like spirits brands are so iconic, like a Jack Daniels or something like that. Me
Mhm.
maybe being able to like touch like one of those like big brands would be like a lot of fun. Um, I think for me, like it would kind of like live probably in that like whiskey world that seems to suit
Okay.
kind of like our aesthetic really well. I think, yeah, I mean, Jack Daniels out that would be like a big one for sure. But I don't even know if you'd want to touch that. I mean, it's such a like an iconic brand, and the branding is
That's a
done so
hard
well
one.
already. Correct? What's that?
I feel like Jameson's needs it. That's
Yeah,
if
that's a
I
good
can
one.
I can deliver the hate as the managing editor. You can't. You can't. You have to be like respectful. I can be a jerk. So
Yeah, yeah,
well, well, one more question before we kind of throw it over to the rest of the audience. But what's next? What's
yeah.
next for Paige?
Uh, well, I think we're just going to keep continuing to do what we're going to do. I touched on it already. I think what's next is we really want to kind of like expand more into wine and spirits than we already have.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
want to kind of like move into hospitality, a little bit more into those like categories. And quite frankly, I think that like we're trying to like think about like different channels as well, like
Yeah.
of what we can offer. I think one of the things that like we realized, if I'm being truthful as well, is like in this past year, the economy has not been overly great. Especially like the second half of this last year, and it makes you realize you're like, okay, like we can't have all our eggs in one basket. So I think kind of like we're going to sit down and think about like what are those other like revenue streams that like we can bring in. Um, yeah, I think, but yeah, I think category wise, like trying to keep that expanseful is good for us. Like I don't want to be kind of like the the all for everything kind of shop,
Yep.
where you're not too specialized, because then I think a lot of times people seek you out based on your specialty. It naturally kind of like advertises yourself like within like an industry. But I think if you're too pigeonholed into like one specific category and that category dies for whatever reason, you're out of business. And so I think just making sure that we're really nimble and can like pivot to different categories if necessary is going to be really critical. So I think that's what our next steps for the next year.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so we have some questions coming in. The first one, this is a really good one, that's coming from Karen. Is sustainable printing techniques playing into anything that you do? So, like cold foil techniques over hot foil method, and also they're asking about sustainable paper selection.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That's something that is obviously extremely important and relevant right now. And yeah, the answer is yes. We're definitely thinking about it. Obviously, paper. I mean, infinitely recyclable. So anytime like we can use paper, and like our projects, it's even that much more better. All the papers that we tend to use are FSC certified.
Mhm.
And I can't remember exactly the criteria behind that, but I think like a certain percentage of the pulp that's in the paper comes from recycled content. And so that's like really important to us as well. You can get some really, really beautiful papers that are recycled, whereas maybe, like 10, 15 years ago, they would look kind of dingy. And I think there's been a lot of innovation that's made in that respect. Um, in terms of like foiling and such, like this came up in like one of our projects like a couple years ago, like one of our clients that was like really, rightfully so, very concerned about like, kind of like the environmental footprint of the packaging that we were creating. And her question was like, is foil like sustainable? And actually worked with Studio on Fire on this to kind of like investigate that. And it's recyclable. And, I think it like, just as long as those glues, can you hear me?
Oh wait, I got it. Sorry, that was total user error. Don't mind me at all. Everybody heard you. Don't worry. So next question.
Okay.
Let's see. I have Brett who is asking, with Glorious, how are you able to achieve child-resistant packaging given the secondary packaging is paper?
Great question. With that, I think, kind of touching back onto sustainability again. Um, with cannabis, you have to have that child resistant aspect, and inevitably that involves like some aspect of plastic. It just does. I think with like, the zipper like on a Mylar bag. So with that package in particular, it's just a blank Mylar bag, unprinted, that then gets slid into the sleeve. So the child resistance comes on the actual pouch itself inside. Think of it like a cereal box. Like when you open up a cereal box, there's that pouch that's inside. That's quite literally what the Glorious Cannabis structure is.
Got it. Kate wants to know what the whole time frame of was for the Glorious project, from like your initial concept to the final design.
Uh, it always takes longer than you expect. I think for us, um, it's maybe like a week or two to kind of like onboard, do the project kickoff, get the information from the client. The strategy kind of portion of it took about a month, if I remember correctly, from start to finish. And then the creative development, I think, took like 5 or 6 weeks. We'll initially kind of do a 3-week dive, where we, create those like initial concepts, come back to the client with like our proposals. And then from there, it's about attaining like the feedback, doing the revisions. That usually takes a couple weeks. If this one, I think, came pretty quickly. There weren't a whole lot of revision requests on this one. We looked at like, some of the illustration on it, like what.
Can't hear you at all.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Okay. Great.
Okay. I'm not sure why it's doing it, but it keeps going to mute. I'll
Yeah,
kind of watch that.
Yeah, mine just did that as well. Could you just kind of briefly kind of say what you from that last question? Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, time frame. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I was probably being a little long-winded there, but like a month for strategy, 4-6 weeks for like creative development, and then another like couple weeks for finishing up different things like illustrations and such. And then you probably have, like a couple months for like the actual like print development, like the printing of the packaging with prototyping and actual execution. So all said and done, it's probably about like 6 months.
Yeah, that seems so fast to me.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you guys turned it around that
Absolutely.
amount of time. Yeah. Well, I think that about wraps it up. One thing I will mention, because I guess a lot of people here that were dropping comments that really did have some questions about sustainability. Check out the group chat here, because Deb dropped a helpful thing here from Neenah about sort of their a lot of their different green sustainable resources and different papers that have some sustainable bona fides. So yeah, today, thank you so much for joining us, Michael, and talking about Glorious
Thank you.
Cannabis and Pavement in general. We're excited to see what else you guys come up with.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks to you guys, not only for all the support that you've lent our studio, but for the Neenah Paper Award. It was very exciting to win that and to talk about that a little bit today. So thank you.
That's great. Yeah, let's well, keep emailing me, keep sending me projects. I love to see it. So,
Absolutely.
all right. Well, have a good rest of your day. See you, Michael.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.